Before you get started with hard flips, you need to know how to do frontside flips. It's very important. I heard that when I was first trying to learn hard flips, and I thought it probably wasn't a big deal. But after I learned frontside flips, hard flips got a lot easier. So I made a video on frontside flips already. Go check that out if you can't do them yet. You should at least be able to land solidly. You don't need to be able to catch them really high. You don't need to have them 100% all the time, but you should at least be able to stay on top of them. Figuring out how to keep the board beneath you on a frontside flip, instead of having the board sort of shoot out and you land like this, but actually keeping it right beneath you, that's the same exact thing that you need to do with hard flips. So go figure those out first, and then come back to this one. Now the foot position for a hard flip will probably be very similar to your frontside flip foot position. Start there at least and make any adjustments. My frontside flip one is about like this, but with hard flips I move my front foot back some. It depends on the type of hard flip you do as well. If you have more vertical end over end frontside flips, you'll probably have more vertical hard flips, and all those different types of hard flips have different types of foot positions. But chances are your hard flips will be just like your frontside flips. So start from there and make any adjustments. So mine is about like this, but there are two different techniques that I've learned so far, and I'll try to explain them both. You can try to learn those, figure out which one works best for you, make your own adjustments to it, because there are still plenty more techniques that I don't know, because there are a lot of different ways to hard flip. So the first one is set up just like my frontside flips, and it felt very, very similar, which is why it got a lot easier once I learned how to frontside flip. So you set your feet up like this, and you start with your shoulders facing forward, and just like the frontside flip, you really have to throw the tail out, and you keep your weight somewhat forward because you need to have this room to flick. When I was first trying to learn hard flips, when I couldn't frontside flip yet, I would sort of keep my weight back, and I'd pop the frontside shove it, and I'd kick flip, and I'd start to flip, and then the board would just hit my foot. So I couldn't get the full spin on it, and it was really hard. I couldn't figure out why it happened like that. So I ended up just trying to flick behind me like this, and I've seen that work with some people, which is why I tried it, but you shouldn't need to do that. You don't see that very often because it's kind of a weird way to get around that problem. So for me, the thing was to stay centered on top of the board and commit. You can't really just throw this trick and see if it works. With some tricks, you can just kind of flip it, not expecting to land, and just see if you can make it happen. You can make the board do that. But with a hard flip, you need to commit. Your first try even, because you need this room. You need to be on top of the board. So you start to pop it. You keep your shoulders forward, and you throw the tail out, and it feels the same way I described the frontside flip. It feels like you pop it, and then it sort of pivots like this, where the nose stays in place, and it does that, and then it'll kind of land tail heavy, and it feels like it's doing that, but I was pretty surprised when I filmed my first hard flip. It didn't look like that at all. But I'm trying to explain the best way how it feels and how I learned it, and hopefully it feels the same way for you. But that's how that one worked for me. The main problem I had was I would get the full flip and only half the spin. And the thing I did for that was kind of strange. I was actually popping it hard enough, but I was flipping so hard that it would actually slow down the spin. So it would start to spin, and then I'd flick so much that it'd actually slow it down. So the technique for that was to try to flick slower and more up and more out, and in that way the board sort of had more room. And this version worked out more flat and not quite as high as the other one. It'd flip kind of like that. So that one is pretty close to how you do frontside flips. So it's not that hard to learn, and you can learn other techniques off of that. And the way I do them now, the way you'll see at the end of the video, is I move my foot from here to about here, and I pop them higher. I pop them more like this. You know, they're not completely flat, they're not vertical either. I don't like those at all. But that's the way you see pros do it. You can get more height on that, you can catch it easier, stuff like that. So that's also what you should do if you get the full spin and only half the flip. You should try to just give yourself more air. I found that I had trouble with that, and if I just popped them higher, tried to scoop them more and just wait and, you know, give the board some room, it worked out a lot easier. So with this, you want to set your feet up about like that, and you pop the tail out like this, and it sort of feels like you're doing like a frontside impossible or a frontside pressure flip or something. You sort of want to make the board do this, where it's not just a frontside shove it, but it's kind of this, you know, where the board sort of flips. And then with your foot about like that, it's the flick with your foot seems very similar to the more flat variation of it, but it's slower because, you know, the board is going to be sort of floating in the air longer. So you don't need to flick as hard, and you can have the same problem. If you flick too hard with this one, the board will start to go up and then get stuck, and it'll just kick flip and stay at this angle. And that's pretty tough. The same thing with the flat one. You have to commit to it. You can't stay back because you won't be able to clear it. So you pop it sort of like this, where it starts to flip, and then you have to flick out, and just you have to jump pretty high. That's the same thing that happens with some other tricks that spin slow. When you're first learning them, jump higher than you think you have to, and that way you can sort of wait for the board to come around, and you know, hopefully it's still you're still on top of it. And if you have trouble with the flip, you know, if you get the full flip but it's only spinning about this much or something like that, try them fakie. I found that fakie hard flips flip a lot easier than going forward, but they're harder to land. So if you have trouble with just the flip, you can try and fakie, try to figure out what works that way, and then try to take them back forward again. But I think fakie ones are actually harder to land. So try and fakie, try to get used to the idea of the flick. Make sure you commit to it. Throw the tail out as much as possible. And because there are so many different types of hard flips, I asked a forum I go to send me clips of their hard flips. So you'll see some of mine, you'll see some of theirs, and the idea is to show you as many different types as possible. So I can give you the best base to start off of. With this trick, I wouldn't expect to be able to go out and do exactly like I said and just have them work, but I'm going to try to give you the best basis, the best starting point, and hopefully you can figure out what works for you as quickly as possible that way. So that should be it. Check out these videos and go out and try them.